Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. Cheryl Adams is my name. I've been a tanker driver for the last 5 years, and I'm 33. It's a difficult job, particularly for women. You receive the glances and remarks. You must be 3 times as tough and twice as good. Yes, I am. I'm not a fool. I trust what my gauges tell me, what I can see, and what I can touch. The ghosts of the supernatural, I always assumed that was simply the result of sleep deprivation and excessive caffeine consumption. You give the newbies a story to frighten them. However, I learned from Clinton Road that certain stories are true whether or not you believe them. It was an early spring night that was raining. It's one of those dreary, never-ending drizzles that make everything seem drab and hazy. Up to a depot in upstate New York, I was transporting a half-full truck of non-hazardous liquid, basically pricey soap. Traffic was at a standstill due to a horrific accident on the freeway, and I had a tight deadline. I was redirected by my GPS. Bless its icy, sensible heart. It chirped that a county road I had never heard of was the shortest route. Clinton Road. There was nothing familiar about the name. I saw it as a simple line on a screen that would save me a few hours and satisfy my dispatcher. However, I sensed a change as soon as I turned onto it. The rain seemed to get heavier, and the world outside my taxi seemed to grow darker. The road was small and felt like a tunnel because of the canopy of trees above it. The rain streaked across my windshield like tears as my headlights bounced off the damp tarmac. It was profoundly unnerving and hypnotic. My eyes were strained against the darkness as I drove for what seemed like an age. Only the rhythmic noises were audible, the quiet drone of the motor and the thump of my wipers. I noticed the bridge at that point. It was only a little, dilapidated concrete arch that over a brook or a portion of the reservoir. It appeared out of place and old, and a boy stood in the pouring rain on the bridge. His age could not have exceeded 8 or 9 years. His brown hair was stuck to his forehead, and he was dressed in a t-shirt and jeans that were totally saturated. He simply stood looking down into the black sea below while resting over the railing. What on earth is a kid doing out here? Was my initial thinking. The rain was falling, and it was the middle of the night at a remote location. My heart twitched. Was he lost? Are you hurt? Has his folks' vehicle broken down? My instincts as a truck driver, which teach you to watch out for other drivers, came into play. The tanker's air brakes hissed in the still night as I slowed it down. I had to pause and check on him. I turned on my hazards as I approached, their amber lights pulsating in the shadows. The chilly, humid air rushed in when I rolled down my window. "Hey kid," over the engine, I yelled. "Are you okay? Do you require assistance?" He didn't look back. He didn't appear to hear me at all. He simply remained there, a little, lonesome figure against the wet road. With my large rig moving at a snail's pace, I was now nearly at the base of the bridge. He moved just as I was going to yell again. He carefully straightened himself before turning his head. His face was obscured by the darkness. It was only a light oval. However, I noticed him raise his arm. Something was in his hand. With a nonchalant flick of his wrist, he flung it after drawing his arm back. Tink. It was a small sound, barely audible over the rain, yet it was clear and crisp. It sounded like a penny striking my windshield, perhaps a quarter. Before it bounced out into the darkness, it hit the glass directly in front of me. I was taken aback. I'm bewildered, not furious. How come he would do that? Was this a joke of some sort? With the cab now directly at the bridge's edge, I brought the truck to a complete halt. Hey, for what purpose was that? The boy remained silent. He simply raised his other hand, held something else, and turned back to the railing. Tink, one more coin. It struck my windshield in precisely the same place. I gazed at the location and then at the boy again. He remained still, as though tossing pennies at passing trucks were the most commonplace thing in the world. I felt a cold creep up my spine that had nothing to do with the window being open. There was a serious problem. It wasn't a joke. It was devoid of malice and adolescent defiance. It was systematic. It was deserted. I made up my mind not to get out of the truck. I had considered calling the cops. On a bridge in the middle of nowhere, there was a lost toddler who might have been disturbed. Still staring at the boy, I reached for my phone. I caught a glimpse of his face as he turned his head back toward me. It was as pale as marble, and naturally so. The light seemed to be drawn into his eyes, which were black, hollow pits. He wasn't even glancing at me. He was examining me. His visage was devoid of any emotion, including fear, despair, or rage. Simply a deep, soul-crushing void. It was the face of an inanimate object. My throat tightened each breath. The phone fell out of my grasp and hit the ground with a thud. The whispers and anecdotes from late-night diners rushed back. The boy's ghost on a bridge. It is said that he will toss the coin back if you toss it over. He had tossed a coin, but I hadn't. For the third time, he raised his hand. He didn't throw it, but I flinched, expecting the sound. He simply extended his little hand to hold it out. One bright quarter glinted on his palm in the dim light from my dashboard. Then he grinned slowly. I have never seen anything so terrible. The smile wasn't joyful. It was not even malevolent. It was a jagged, shattered creature that fell short of his lifeless gaze. It was the smile of something that was pathetically failing at being human. That's when I felt the fear. A gut-wrenching, primordial horror that made my blood freeze. It wasn't a boy. It existed. An echo, a memory stuck on this bridge, compelled to repeatedly perform the same action, and I was now included in its cycle. I didn't consider it. I responded. I pressed the accelerator hard. The tanker lurched forward into the bridge. It roared to life. I refused to look at him, instead keeping my eyes on the glass of the road ahead. However, I could sense him right outside my window. As I walked by, I could sense his vacant, icy stare. I took a chance and looked in my passenger side mirror as my taxi crossed the bridge. He had left. There was nobody on the bridge. No indication that anyone had visited. Only the darkness, the road, and the rain. He seemed to have just vanished back into the darkness. I didn't slow down. With my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, I pushed the tanker as fast as I could on that perilous route. His shape appeared in every shadow. Each flash of light on my windshield appeared to be a different coin. I feared that he would resurface, either sitting in my passenger seat or worse, standing in the center of the road. I experienced a surge of relief, so strong it nearly made me ill, when I finally saw the main highway's glorious, lovely sight. My entire body shook as I pulled over onto the shoulder. I sat there for a while, taking in the sounds of the everyday world, including the rain and cars. I glanced at my windshield. No scratches, markings, or indications of the coins were present. I had heard them, even though it was only a bit of wet glass. I'd seen him. After a while, I collected myself and completed my route. I kept the whole story to myself. I mean, who would trust me? They would claim that I was exhausted and that my eyes were deceived by the rain. But what I observed is known to me. I saw a lost spirit, a ghost caught in a game loop that only he could comprehend. I remain a no-nonsense individual. I continue to trust what I can see and feel. However, I now realize that there are things in this universe that we simply cannot comprehend. Real things, even if they don't leave any evidence. And I am aware that I met one of them on a soggy night on a desolate bridge in New Jersey. And I shall always be haunted by his hollow smile. And I shall always be haunted by his hollow smile. Gary Whitman is my name. Since I was old enough to obtain my CDL, I have been a long-haul truck driver. I am 52 years old. I'm referred to as a road dog. I have driven more miles than the majority of individuals have on their automobile odometers. I have viewed this nation from every perspective and in every type of weather. On the road, I am a composed man. Your opponent is panic. You maintain your composure. You maintain your concentration. You remain alive. I've always taken pride in my ability to remain composed. However, a section of New Jersey road put that serenity to the test in a manner that nothing else had. It put my perception of reality, my intellect, and my eyes to the test. I had made this journey 100 times before, transporting paper products from a Pennsylvania factory to a Long Island distribution hub. The night was heavy and dense, and it was late, perhaps 2 a.m. A fog started to sweep in as I entered New Jersey. This morning mist wasn't like the others. It was a foregone Clinton road. Over the years, I had occasionally had to take the road as a shortcut, generally because of accidents on the larger highways. Of course, every trucker has stories, and I had heard them, but I had never seen anything. I attempted to avoid it because it seemed like a spooky, badly maintained road. On the other hand, the fog itself was famous. It was renowned for its unusual thickness, sudden appearance, and ability to completely engulf the road, and it was living up to the hype tonight. It began as phantom fingers and wisps slipping out of the trees. In a matter of minutes, my entire universe had shrunk to the 20 feet of pavement that my headlights illuminated. The white wall of fog was solid and whirling. My engine's usual growl was muffled and reduced to a distant thrum. I had the impression that I was driving at the ocean's bottom. I slowed to maybe 15 miles per hour, a crawl. My eyes were strained to see the thin white line on the road's border, and my hands were clenched around the wheel. It was hypnotic and confusing experience. My eyes began to dazzle from the swirling patterns of the fog in my headlights. Unreal shapes appeared to me. There are phantoms dancing just beyond my field of vision. I was aware that it was simply pareidolia, the brain's propensity to perceive patterns in seemingly random events, plus exhaustion. I've experienced enough fog driving to understand how it feels. It was all in my head, I told myself repeatedly. I saw him at that point. A figure appeared on the right side of the road through a patch of fog that was a little thinner. One of the men was jogging. He was dressed in running shoes, shorts, and a hooded sweatshirt. I could see him jogging away from me in the same direction. My initial response was a shock of incredulity. It's a jogger outside, on a perilous, isolated road in a fog so dense you could hardly see your own hands. It was after 2 in the morning. It was illogical. My rational mind began to look for answers. Perhaps he was rushing for assistance after his automobile broke down. However, he wasn't attempting to flag me down or wave his arms. He was merely running. His form was flawless, and his pace was steady. He appeared to be running in a suburban park in the morning than on a spooky road in the middle of the night. I continued to slow down so as not to shock him. He couldn't have a wide berth since the route was too small. To let him know I was there, I gave my horn a little tap, a brief, amiable beep. He did not respond. He didn't look around, didn't cause him to stumble. He simply continued to jog. The cadence of his feet striking the concrete was constant. The luminous fog cast a gloomy silhouette across his torso. My spine tingled with uneasiness. It was odd, too weird. Squinting through the glass, I leaned forward in an attempt to gain a better view. I saw more features as my truck gradually drew closer. It was a dark grey sweatshirt, the black shorts. From beneath his hood, I could see the condensation of his breath. He appeared totally stable, totally actual. My taxi was now nearly at his side. I was perhaps 10 feet away. The chilly, moist air assaulted my face as I rolled down my window. I was going to ask him if he was all right and if he needed a ride. "Hey, buddy," I interrupted. "Everything all right?" This time he did something. He gave up jogging. He stopped completely and turned his head slowly and purposefully to face me. I hope he didn't. The thick hood of his hoodie cast a shadow over his face. I was unable to see his nose, eyes, or his lips. It was merely an area of complete, impenetrable darkness. Not because his face was hidden. The reason was because there was nothing to observe. The shape of a human head was a void. My blood froze. The cool-headed, collected Gary Whitman was gone, replaced by a scared man gazing at an impossible thing. My foot slipped and struck the accelerator after it had been lingering over the brake. He vanished as the truck stumbled forward a few feet. He didn't dive out of sight or run into the woods. He appeared briefly as a three-dimensional, substantial man standing on the side of the road with nothing behind his hood. He had disbanded the next. He simply vanished like smoke. He disintegrated into fog wisps and was reabsorbed into the viscous white soup that enveloped us. The only sounds and traces were the whirling mist and the deserted road. The truck groaned to a stop when I applied the brakes hard. My heart was beating frantically against my ribs as I sat there. As I tried to digest what my eyes had just witnessed, my mind was racing. A light trick, hallucination. I've experienced fatigue while traveling. Although I've seen shadows move, I've never had a hallucination of something so substantial and detailed that then vanished right in front of my eyes. With my flashlight in my hand, I exited the taxi. I required evidence. Something to bring me back to earth was what I needed. The place where he had been standing was where I walked. My flashlight's beam sliced through the fog like a feeble cone. In the muddy shoulder, I swept it back and forth across the pavement. No footprints were found. The rainy air made the earth wet and squishy. In the muck, my own boots made deep, noticeable impressions. However, there was nothing where the jogger had been. There was no damage to the ground. He appeared to be a projection, a recollection etched on the fog itself, as though he lacked solidity and weight. My hands were shaking as I climbed back into my pickup. The silence was broken. There was no longer any concentration. A raw, primordial terror was all that remained. With my nerves rattling and my eyes wide, I travelled the remainder of that road, anticipating his return to emerge from the fog directly in front of my truck at any time. He didn't. As I got closer to the end of the road, the fog finally started to clear, and it seemed like a relief, being submerged for too long to emerge into the fresh night air. That night has been on my mind 1,000 times. I've attempted to explain it away and rationalize it, but I've failed. I saw a guy composed of shadow and fog. I saw him turn a featureless face in my direction, and then I saw him vanish. Clinton Road is said to deceive people. It's preying in your head. It wasn't a trick, though. I never wanted to know that truth, that we underestimate how thin the world is. Additionally, ghosts that move between raindrops and hide in fog can occasionally be seen in the correct location on the right night. Most of the time, I remain a calm man. However, a portion of that serenity never returned from Clinton Road. It was left behind on a damp stretch of pavement as a man who wasn't a man fled into the darkness. Remember to like and leave a comment below if this story made you shiver. Let's go on to another horrifying story. You can call me Monica Torres. I am a 29-year-old driver of a refrigerated truck, or reefer. Mostly, I transport produce up and down the East Coast. I enjoy living a solitary life. I enjoy the steady rhythm of the road, the peaceful hum of the reefer unit, and the sensation of being in my own little world, a rolling bubble of glass and steel. Since I'm not a huge person, I've had to develop my toughness and awareness. You come to trust your instincts. This is your strongest line of defense. I've escaped dangerous situations, dubious truck stops, and overly pleasant men on the CB thanks to my instincts. However, nothing I had ever experienced in my life could have prepared me for the instinct I had on Clinton Road. There was no warning. The cry was primordial. In the dead of August, the night was hot and muggy. It was the kind of night when the cicadas buzzed so loudly that it seemed like the trees were screaming, and the air was heavy and dense. I had a lot of fresh Jersey tomatoes that needed to be kept at a precise 55, and I was on a tight timeline. I usually drove up I-287 through a parking lot with an endless sea of red taillights, an upturned tanker carrying chemicals. According to the radio, it would belong to us. Dave, my dispatcher, a tense man, called me in a panic. There would be no tomatoes left. I was given the Clinton Road alternative by him. The name was familiar to me. It was trucker mythology, a place that was spoken with a mixture of real terror and morbid interest. I had always brushed it off. I grew up in Newark and am a city girl. I think there are real dangers. Ghosts, goblins, blown tires, muggings, and reckless drivers. For movies, that is. A road is a road. It felt like a doorway at the turnoff. I was in the well-known, well-lit world of suburban New Jersey for a minute. Then I found myself in a near-complete blackness. Ancient and overgrown, the trees' branches interlocked overhead to create a thick black canopy that obscured the stars and moon. My headlights appeared faint, engulfed by the suffocating darkness. Due to the twisty and narrow road, my large rig felt an intruder in a location it didn't belong to. Awkward and awkward. The silence was the first thing that caught my attention. The cicadas' incessant, deafening buzz had ceased. It was like a switch was flicked the instant my tires touched that asphalt. The world outside my taxi became utterly strangely silent. I could only hear my reefer unit's faint mechanical drone and my engine's thrum. There was life in the silence. It weighed heavily and oppressively on the taxi. For almost 15 minutes, I had been driving with stiff shoulders and my eyes darting over the impenetrable wall of woods on each side. I had to stop, unchecking my reefer, not taking a rest. I couldn't take any chances with a delicate load like tomatoes, and the temperature indicator had been varying a little. On the roadside, I discovered a tiny area of muck that was just barely large enough for my rig. With a loud hiss, I engaged the brake and pulled over, keeping the headlights and engine on. The sensation began while I sat there for a while, allowing the engine to idle. It started off as a little tingle on the nape of my neck, the kind you get when you think someone is watching you. Behind me, I could only see the dark, deserted road when I looked in my mirrors. On my right, I peered into the trees. Just a dark, twisted jumble of trees and darkness. I convinced myself that I was just being affected by the road's eerie reputation. I was mentally preparing myself. In my own voice, I mumbled, "Get a grip, Monica," which sounded loud and strange in the quiet taxi. I reached for my flashlight and started to open the door when the sensation became more intense. It had stopped being a prickle. It was a tangible strain, a hefty weight. It was the indisputable, unquestionable fact that I wasn't alone. The deep, dark woods on my truck's passenger side were the source of the sensation. On the doorknob, my hand froze. My heart began to beat a bit more quickly. I turned my head gently and gazed into the forest's darkness. Down the road, my headlights illuminated a wide area, but they couldn't reach the woods. It resembled a solid night wall. My eyes strained as I peered, attempting to make out what my instinct was telling me was there. Then I caught sight of them. One moment they weren't there, and the next they were. Like a creature waking, they just opened. There were two spots of light, some 50 yards away, deep in the trees, like the tail lights of a car seen through dense fog, or the embers of a dying fire. They were a dull, blazing red. They weren't tail lights, though. For that, they were too high in the air. They were also motionless. They were also observing me. I was having trouble breathing. My lungs felt as though they were gripped in a fist. The two red lights gazed back at me as I did. They remained still. They remained still. They simply burned with a constant, evil ferocity. I attempted to explain it. A mirror. An animal's eyes. A deer, perhaps. The number. I've seen 1,000 deer in my headlights. They have a vivid greenish-white reflection in their eyes. Additionally, they are constantly twitching, anxious, and prepared to run. A deer's eyes were not these. They were patient, predatory, and serene. They were also large and far separated. There was something enormous affixed to their eyes. I felt a chilling, paralyzing terror creep in. I had never experienced that terror before. A profound, intuitive fear that overcame all reason. Fear that overcame all reason. It was the terror experienced by a prey animal that has just discovered a predator, as cornered it. I realized with a start that I had been about to go outdoors, while my hand was still on the door handle. With that, I would have been in the dark. I cautiously and slowly withdrew my hand from the door. I wanted to avoid moving too quickly. I thought it would charge if I even exhaled too loudly. Unblinking, the two crimson eyes continued to stare at me. Their intelligence was palpable to me. This animal wasn't stupid. It knew. It was observing me. It waited. What was it seeking? The question reverberated in my mind's frightful quiet. I was confined to my taxi, a metal container that felt as brittle as glass all of a sudden. There were more than just trees in the woods now. They were a layer. The road has ceased to be a route. It was a trap. The minutes seemed to drag on forever. The eyes and me. A frightful, silent standoff. I considered honking my horn, but I was afraid of the reactions it could elicit. I considered putting the vehicle in drive and driving off, but I was terrified to look away from the red lights for even a moment for fear that they would move. My window would be where they would be. Then things worsened. Something low started coming from the forest, more felt than heard. It was a deep guttural resonance. It was the type of sound that reverberates in your teeth and bones. It was a growl. It wasn't a dog's or bear's growl, though. It was harsher, lower, and brimming with an old-fashioned anger that raised the hair on my arms. The sound was that of something that had been starving for a very long time. The tipping point was the snarl. Urgent, frenzied need to flee took the place of the immobility caused by terror. I had stopped thinking about the tomatoes. My dispatcher was not on my mind. Survival was on my mind. I quickly reached out and put the gearbox into drive. I pressed the accelerator hard. With a roar, the engine and the tires whirling in the mud before finding traction on the road, the vehicle lurched forward. I was afraid to look in the mirror. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead. On that twisty road, I drove like a crazy woman, pushing the rig faster than I should have. I didn't give a damn. All I had to do was step back from their eyes. There appeared to be a tinge of red in every shadow between me and that voice. In the trees, every dark form appeared poised to lunge. I'm not sure how long I drove, my breath coming in quick, frantic gasps as my heart pounded against my ribs. However, then I noticed it, the lovely, glorious glimmer of streetlights. The path has come to an end. It seemed as though I had emerged from a dark, deep ocean as I emerged onto the well-lit, busy roadway. I nearly started crying with relief when the noises of everyday traffic, other vehicles, and the outside world swept over me. Before I felt secure enough to pull into a well-lit, packed service plaza, I drove 10 more miles. I sat there shaking uncontrollably after parking the truck and killing the engine. There was no longer any threat in the cab's stillness. It was simply deserted. I eventually exited and checked the reefer unit. It was a comfortable temperature. While the tomatoes were all right, I wasn't. With my flashlight beam trembling, I made my way to the passenger side of my truck. They were visible when I glanced to the side of the trailer that had been facing the woods. There are 3 lengthy, deep metal scratches that extend from the trailer center to its rear. They were deep and wide, like enormous claws tearing into the aluminum. It was their first time there. I would have spotted them. I know my rig. I ran my fingers down the margins of the scratches. They were new. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night weather as I turned to face the dark highway toward Clinton Road. It had located me. I could feel it touching me now. I kept the true story to myself. I claimed that a low-hanging branch was the source of the scrapes. People think that branches exist. They reject the existence of entities that lurk in the shadows of the world, have crimson eyes, and make impossible growls. However, I think this because I sat in my taxi and looked into the eyes of an unnatural entity, and I am aware that the darkness would have engulfed me if I had opened that door and gotten out of my truck. In the middle of the night, truckers would have continued to gossip about me. Frankie Morales is my name. My age is 41, and the unending ribbon of asphalt, the buzz of the diesel engine, and the 18 wheels of a Peterbilt have been my entire universe for the past 20 years. In every state in the lower 48, I have transported anything from industrial machinery to produce. I've dealt with washed-out highways in the bayou, witnessed blizzards in the Rockies that would freeze a man solid in minutes, and traversed the frantic maze of traffic in Los Angeles. I'm not a spook-prone man. I'm realistic. You identify an issue and find a solution. You drink coffee, you're exhausted, and you're afraid. Actually, I never did. Not until Clinton Road that night. It was a late October run, the kind where the trees are like skeleton fingers scratching at a bruised purple sky, and the air is biting. I was traveling up toward the New York border from Paterson with a load of assorted products. Although the route was short and well known, my dispatcher had alerted me about a jackknifed rig on Route 23. The backup extended 4 miles. He recommended taking a detour. Clinton Road. The name was familiar to me. As superstitious people, truckers whispered about Clinton Road in hushed tones at Greasy Spoon diners around 3 in the morning. They would discuss ghostly headlights, unusual people in the forest, a boy with ghosts on a bridge. I always simply sipped my coffee and grunted. Stories for grown men over a campfire. I only believe them to be that. A road is a road. Trees, paint, and pavement. Is there anything to fear? It was an unassuming turn-off. My rig was sucked into the shadows of the West Milford woods by a small opening. The road wasn't as good as I had anticipated. It had no shoulder at all, and was winding, tight, and dimly lit. Through the suffocating darkness, my high beams carved a lonesome trench. On either side, the trees swarm in like silent, critical onlookers. The first thing that struck me was the silence, just the roar of my engine and the crunch of falling leaves beneath my tires. No houses, no other automobiles. It was as though you were driving into another, long-forgotten universe. I spotted them for the first time after maybe 10 minutes of driving. My rearview mirror has 2 pinpricks of light in it. At first, I didn't give it much thought. The identical detour is most likely being taken by another car. In fact, I felt relieved. It couldn't hurt to have some company on this godforsaken stretch. However, the lights increased in size more quickly than they ought to have. This man was on the move. In a matter of seconds, he got closer. His headlights blinded me as they burned into my mirrors. It was a battered and rusted old pickup vehicle, possibly a late model Ford or Chevy, not tearing up a road like a crazy person, but the kind of vehicle you see rotting in a farmer's field. It was so near to my bumper that I could only see the glaring glare of its highlights, not even its grille. "Okay, friend," I mumbled, "back off," and lightly warned him by tapping my brakes. The truck remained motionless. In fact, it drew nearer. The landscape outside my window became even darker as the light flooded my taxi, blotting away the shadows. On the steering wheel, my knuckles were white. This driver wasn't merely impatient. This was combative. This posed a danger. In an attempt to put some distance between us, I accelerated a bit. At this point, the route curved sharply to the left. My trailer groaned in protest as I did my best to take it. The lights of the vehicle remained fixed on me. He made his move as I emerged from the turn. With my heart banged against my ribs, he swerved into the oncoming lane, not that there was any oncoming traffic, and drove up next me, ready to lay on my horn and tell him what I thought. I looked over, but my words were frozen in my throat by what I witnessed. Nobody was behind the wheel. There was no one in the driver's seat. The steering wheel remained still. I blinked, supposing it was a reflection or a trick of the light. I gazed intently, tears welling up in my eyes from the stress. That pickup's cab was empty and gloomy. Even still, its engine was howling like a wounded animal as it kept perfect pace with me. I felt a chill of dread that was colder than any winter wind. My head was yelling, "It's not feasible. This isn't possible." I couldn't lie with my eyes, though. The vehicle then veered in my direction. His fender scraped along my trailer, making a terrible screech of metal on metal. The entire rig trembled. In an attempt to avoid being forced into the thick row of trees on the right, I struggled with the wheel. The pickup struck me more forcefully this time. It was an intentional act of violence. I was being chased off the road by it. "What do you want?" I screamed, but the commotion drowned out the sound. I blew it away. I began to draw ahead as the engine of the Peterbilt roared. I thought I had him for a moment. The pickup tipped back a little. I took a chance and looked in my side mirror. The dark form with 2 scorching eyes was still there. Then it struck me once more, this time at my cab rather than my trailer. My front tire was its target. That meant something to me. At this pace, a blown steer tire would be disastrous. I wouldn't have any control. The rig would plunge into the woods, topple, or jackknife. The penalty was death. Just as the pickup lunged, I jerked the wheel to the left, placing the center line between us. My tire was missed by its bumper, by inches. The trailer behind me fishtailed excessively due to the force of my swerve. A ghost was after me as I wrestled with a 40-ton beast on a twisting, tight road, fighting for my life. For a brief distance, the road straightened out. I could make out the dim glimmer of what must have been a bridge ahead. They called it the Dead Man's Curve. The dining stories reminded me of the name. Immediately following a tiny bridge over the reservoir and a notably abrupt and banked curve. If I didn't slow down, I'd never make it down. The phantom vehicle would be on me, though, if I did. He was also aware of it. With a sickening crunch, he crashed into the side of my cab after charging forward once more. If he could sense my hesitation, I was pelted with glass as the passenger side window exploded. For a horrifying instant, the rig veered to the left, toward the reservoir, and the impact flung me against my door. Through the trees, I could see the quiet, dark river. My muscles screamed as I pulled the wheel back with a rush of adrenaline. Now I had to stop. I had no choice but to use my desperate and most likely foolish strategy. I reduced my speed slightly, pretending that the truck was overtaking me. Taking the bait, the phantom pickup pulled up next to me for another assault, prepared to provide the last shove. I applied the brakes just as its front fender touched my door. This time it's not a soft tap. I threw everything I had at them. Air brakes shrieked and hissed. The tires protested by howling, and there was a strong shuddering throughout the rig. It was an extremely risky maneuver. It worked even though I might have jackknifed right there. I was caught completely off guard as the driverless vehicle sped by. It moved directly toward the bend, thanks to its momentum. For a brief moment, I saw it clearly in the moonlight. A completely empty shell of rust and rage. It didn't go any slower. It failed to turn. At the steepest part of the curve, it simply continued to slide off the road. There was no crash, no explosion, no splash. The vehicle appeared briefly, a sturdy, menacing figure. The next time, it was gone. It did not fall into the sea. Right at the edge of the road, it simply disappeared. Its engine's roar was interrupted, and an eerie quiet took its place. Its headlights vanished with a blink. In my taxi, I sat there. The engine of my tractor was idling rough when it stalled in the middle of the road. I gasped in terrible, raspy breaths. I could hardly hold the wheel because my hands were shaking so much. A chilly wind whipped through the cab, and the passenger window was a huge hole. I shifted the truck into gear and rolled forward very slowly and carefully. My legs felt like jello when I pulled off before the curve. The truck had vanished, so I made my way to the roadside. Other than my own, there were no skid marks. The railing is intact. In the first place, there was no guardrail. There was no indication that another car had been present. In the quiet, dark woods, only the traces of my own tires in the soil. I climbed back into my pickup and continued down Clinton Road without seeing anyone else. The bright, everyday street lights felt like a lifeline when I eventually returned to the main roadway. At the first truck stop, I pulled in. I sat there trembling for an hour after realizing the engine was still running. I never disclosed the truth to the company. I said that as a deer raced out, I swerved and struck a tree branch, shattering the window. My pay was deducted for the damage. I didn't give a damn. I have 20 years of driving experience. I've seen everything. However, I have never again made that detour, and I still get a chill down my spine when I'm traveling alone at night and a pair of headlights gets a bit too close, because I am aware that not all roads go to the same place. They lead to a memory from which you can never fully recover, and I am aware that I wasn't only being tailgated on Clinton Road. The ghost of a machine was hunting me, a ghost that desired to pull me down into the same shadows from which it sprang. Was this story enjoyable to you? Tell me in the comments below. Remember to like this video as well. Let's go on to our next story now. Let's go on to our next story now. On the road, I go by Big Ed, but my real name is Eddie Lawson. I am 47 years old and have driven a large rig for more than half of my life. Additionally, it has been a flatbed for the past 15 years. They call me for the awkward situations, the enormous, Dinosaur-like metal excavators, the enormous prefabricated barriers that require to escort cars to cross a crossroads. I suppose I'm suited for the position. Large, sturdy, and difficult to move. I'm like a refrigerator with a driver's license, they say. That's a compliment to me. Stability is crucial in my line of business. You must act professionally. You must relax. Above all, you must abide with the law. You could eat off my spotless driving record. I think I've gotten 2 or 3 minor moving violations in the last 25 years. Observing the red and blue flashes, I deliberately design my life to avoid situations when I see lights in my mirror. I have a headache. It entails paperwork, delays, and a negative financial impact. It's an issue that needs to be resolved with prudence and compliance. However, there was nothing wrong with the lights I saw on Clinton Road. They were an unanswerable question. They weren't searching for a license and registration or a fine. They were searching for something very different, something that had been lost to time, and they believed they had discovered it in me for 10 awful minutes. It was a mid-November night, the clear, cool night that only late autumn can bring. The sky was a shower of diamond dust stars, and the air was so clear and pure it felt like it may burst. I was returning to the yard in Skakis dead-heading, my flatbed trailer clanging and empty behind me. The drive back was typically a straight, easy shot along I-80, and the drop-off had been close to the Delaware Water Gap, a heavy piece of milling equipment. It was about 3 in the morning, m. Then there was a ghost town down the roadway. In the silence of the cab, I was making great time, and the rumble of my Cummins engine was a familiar and reassuring chant. I was already considering getting a bed of my own, which is an uncommon luxury in this profession. The night changed at that point. Ahead, the darkness was illuminated by a succession of bright flashing signs. The road ahead closed. Every lane is blocked. Up or one. In the distance, a sea of emergency lights flashed. It was confirmed by the radio. I-80 was entirely closed to eastbound and westbound traffic due to a jackknife tanker. Hours would pass before they cleared it, possibly until daybreak. My GPS, a Garmin that was typically dependable and had been 4 years, my co-pilot began to lose his temper. It insisted that I try to get back on the restricted highway by making a U-turn. With every computation it made, its synthesized voice became more desperate. "Turn around if you can," it chirped, unaware. Disgusted, I turned it off and grabbed my actual co-pilot, who never required a satellite. The road atlas of my former dog-eared ran MCN. Coffee stains and years of oily fingerprints had left its pages as supple as cloth. I had never been misled by it, but it was a relic. I laid the atlas over my passenger seat, the fine network of lines glowing warmly in the tiny map light. I started looking for a bypass and found one after my finger followed the broad red line of I-80 to the place where I was stopped. On the map, there was a thin, squiggly blue line that wound across a large, dark green area of forest. Eventually, I thought I might be spit out into Route 23. Clinton Road was a county road long after the collision. There was a little, faraway ring of recognition as the name registered. It was part of the folklore of truckers. The stories start at 3 in the morning, m. Stories of phantom, headlights pursuing you, and a ghost child on a bridge who tosses coins of odd creatures in the woods were spoken over lukewarm coffee in truck stop diners. 4 lonely drivers. I had always categorized them under campfire legends. I'm a man who thinks that things can be measured. Air pressure, torque, and steel's solid weight. A road is made of paint and pavement. Is there anything to fear? In addition, I was exhausted. I simply wanted to get home, and my flatbed was empty. I reasoned that my large, noisy, deserted trailer was likely more frightening than any local haunt. I shrugged, put the truck in gear, folded the map, and headed for the exit that would take me into the mythology. The change was abrupt and startling. I was on a bright 4-lane highway 1 minute, and then I was entering a tight, twisting tunnel of complete blackness. The eerie road lived up to the hype. The trees were old and twisted, their bare branches snatching at the starry sky like skeletal fingers. The environment outside my cab felt small and oppressive because of the canopy they created, which blocked off the majority of the surrounding light. It was the most deep silence I had ever known. There was a profound, strange silence that appeared to absorb the sound of my own engine, replacing the typical hum of faraway traffic. My flatbed seemed light and unsteady without any weight to support it. The cab jolted with each dip and fracture in the badly maintained road. The truck moaned and shook. In the deafening silence, its sounds are loud and strange. I felt tense, I'll be honest. Now, the eerie tales that had appeared so absurd under the highway's bright lights were scuttling around in the back of my head. Beneath the roar of my diesel engine was a faint, steady hum of apprehension. As my eyes scanned the impenetrable darkness on either side of the road, I tightened my grasp on the wheel. My world burst into color after I had been on that eerie road for about 20 minutes, the hypnotic turns beginning to lull me into a tense cadence. Suddenly, a dazzling strobing light inundated my entire taxi. Blue and red. Blue and red. I didn't just jump with joy. My chest felt as though it was trying to punch its way out. It was instinct. I quickly glanced in the rearview mirror as my foot struck the brake. It was there. A police vehicle. Its light bar flashed with a silent, desperate intensity, and it was right on my tail, so close I couldn't see the bumper. The words were a puff of white in the chilly taxi as I complained. Ah, hell. I did a frantic diagnosis as my mind raced. Now what? Did I drive too fast? The speedometer caught my attention. Although it felt dangerously fast on this winding route, the needle was hovering at 40 miles per hour, which was probably the legal limit. Was there no tail light on? The incessant rattling might have caused a light bulb to come loose. I glanced at my warning lights and gauges. It was all green. Everything was as usual. However, you don't dispute the lights that flash. You cooperate rather than provoke. I worked as a professional. I depressed the throttle gradually while looking for a safe spot to stop on the tight shoulder. I discovered an area that was just a bit wider than the remainder of the road, a tiny, muddy plot of ground that provided sufficient space. With the tires digging a little into the soft earth, I maneuvered the large tractor over. I brought my empty truck's 20 tons to a complete halt with a loud hiss of the air brakes. I performed the rituals, the practiced routine of any truck driver being stopped. The country music station was destroyed by me on the radio, returning the cab to that eerie quiet. I lowered down my own window after powering down the passenger side window, allowing the chilly November air to fill the cab. I put both of my big hands in full sight on the top of the driving wheel. I was familiar with the procedure. All I could do now was wait. I waited and waited some more. With frenetic, alternating strokes of red and blue, the lights painted the barren trees as they continued their quiet, frustrating dance. The interior of my taxi was transformed into a confusing disco as the strobing light bounced off my mirrors, dashboard, and gear shifts chrome. However, nothing else took place. The policeman remained in his vehicle. My taxi was not illuminated by the spotlight. Instructions didn't cause the PA system to come alive. About 20 feet behind my trailer, the automobile sat there, a silent flashing sentinel. Its silhouette was readily visible in my side mirror. It was a vintage Ford Crown Victoria, the boxy, iconic model that had long since been phased out by most departments. Instead of the modern, low-profile LEDs, it had a single, antiquated light bar on the roof and was white. As my initial nervousness began to turn into perplexity and irritation, I mumbled to myself, "Okay, what's the hold-up?" Myself, "Okay, what's the hold-up?" I remained where I was, keeping my hands on the wheel and trying to be patient. Perhaps he was running my plates. That could take a minute. What was bothering me the most, though, was the silence. The sound coming from the car behind me was completely silent. There was no crackling of a police radio, no buzz of an engine, and no sound of an officer speaking to dispatch. All that was audible was the light's constant, silent flashing. It was essentially incorrect. After what seemed like forever, but was really only 2 or 3 minutes, a fresh sensation started to appear, chilly and sharp. This was incorrect. It was not your typical traffic stop. That is not how a police officer sits. They are action-oriented men and women. Either they're on the PA instructing you to move on, or they're coming towards your window with a ticket book. The procedural script I was so familiar with was broken by this silent, static waiting. The cold air stung my face as I put my head out the open window and glanced back. The Crown Vic remained, its light still throbbing in the darkness like a silent heart. The officer was not visible to me inside. It was impossible because of the glare on the windshield and the continuous flashing. Behind the wheel, it was only a vague, black form. I called out, "Hey," but the huge, deserted woods drowned out my voice, which sounded unexpectedly feeble. No one replied. Everything okay back there? Not a sound, not a flash of movement, only the incessant, quiet flashing. My chest started to grow with a new kind of whirring, a kind of fear I had never seen before. Getting a ticket was no longer the point of this. This has to do with how terribly bad the situation was. There was a terrible problem. My mind, which is constantly searching for a workable solution, leapt to a reasonable but unsettling conclusion. Was the cop experiencing a seizure, a heart attack, or some medical emergency? After pulling me over, he passed out behind the wheel. I felt a rush of adrenaline at the concept. I was a large man. I was familiar with basic first aid. I could assist. Okay, that's it. I informed that the taxi is empty. My seatbelt clicked loudly when I unbuckled it. I was prepared to leave, to go back there and see how he was doing, to act like the responsible adult. The silence was broken by a sound when my hand made contact with the chilly metal of the door handle. The police car was the source. It was not the sound of a door opening, a voice, or a siren. It was one loud, crackling blast of radio static in the middle of the night. It had an ancient, distorted sound, like a transmission straining to get through a long period of time, and a voice came through the static. It was dim, small, and jumbled. "The machine has a ghost. SH. Be advised, all units. On Clinton Road, the pursuit is underway. The suspect is regarded as dangerous and armed." A hiss resurfaced in the broadcast, followed by complete stillness. Not only did my blood run cold, in my veins, it seemed to turn to cold slush. There was a chase, an armed suspect, and I froze, my hand just inches from the door handle. Was I a part of a high-stakes police operation? However, that didn't make sense. There was no chase. All I had was this one silent automobile, my empty flatbed, and me. Additionally, the message had sounded remarkably ancient. The current police radio's clear digital sound wasn't the sound. It was the hazy AM radio sound of a transmission from a film that was 50 years old. My heart was beating against my ribs in a hard, furious rhythm. I turned to face the car once more, my eyes wide with a startling realization. Like a slow, deep breath, the flashing light's rhythm seemed to calm down, becoming less chaotic and more hypnotic. And as the world went back to its original black and white, I noticed it in the little moment of darkness in between the flashes. The automobile didn't look right. It wasn't sturdy, transparent and fading. It resembled a memory that was having trouble maintaining its shape. Through the Crown Victoria's body, I could make out the dim silhouettes of the trees. It resembled a picture that had spent too much time in the light. Only a ghostly remnant of what it once was remained after its colors and substance washed away. In an attempt to clear the image, I violently shook my head. I said to myself, "You're tired, Ed," in a hard whisper. "You're seeing things and you're tired." I realized that it wasn't a trick of the light. I recognized what I was witnessing. I needed to leave that place. The want to run was too strong. However, there was another aspect of me that required confirmation, the practical, uncompromising side. I made the decision to leave in order to verify my own sanity, not to assist. Without the filter of my truck's windows and mirrors, I had to see it for myself. My door's hinges groaned in protest as I pushed it open. I was going to get down on the running board to put my feet firmly on the ground and confront this absurdity when the dome light came on. Directly, the siren screamed at that moment. The night was torn apart by a single, soul-shattering, deafening blast of sound. However, the sound was incorrect. It wasn't the high-low, multi-ton and shriek of a modern police vehicle. It was an ancient mechanical siren, the sort that needed to be physically cranked to its highest point before descending gradually. I had not heard this sound in person since I was a young child watching parades in the 1970s, but it was a melancholy rising and falling wail. It was an enormous ghost. My body was paralyzed by the sound, which fixed me in place with an instinctive terror. I stared in awe as the police car started to drive, while I stood there with one foot in the cab and one out. It didn't veer around me to pursue me further. It began to retreat. Its translucent, spectral form glided across the asphalt as it slowly and methodically slid backwards. The sorrowful winding siren sound faded as it fled down the dark road, its mute lights still flashing hypnotically. With each step it took, its figure became more translucent and fainter as it backed up and up and up. It seemed to be fading away in both time and space. It went around a steep bend in the road, and everything disappeared from the earth, including its lights, music, and basic existence. Then there was nothing but the dense darkness of Clinton Road and the deep, oppressive quiet. There were no more flashing lights. The siren had vanished. The vehicle has vanished. My mind was having a hard time processing the reality of what I had just seen. So I stood there for a whole minute, half in, half out. Was it all in my head? Was I so exhausted that I had created a whole visual and oral hallucination with an old-fashioned soundtrack? Compared to the alternative, it seems more likely. Shutting my eyes, I drew back. Shutting my eyes, I drew back. Entered the taxi and locked the door after slamming it. I could hardly grasp the gear change since my hands were shaking so much. I tried to reinsert the reasoning in my mind by taking a deep, ragged breath and then another. Perhaps it was a complex prank. Some local youths with a loud music system and a repaired, retired police cruiser. But the way it simply disappeared over the bend, looking so faded and otherworldly, that couldn't be explained by a joke. I needed to leave that place. With my foot stomping on the gearbox, I put the vehicle in accelerator more forcefully than is required. The tires briefly spun in the mud before gaining traction as the engine roared. I didn't care whether I was speeding anymore, so I backed off onto the road. I needed to get as far away from that location as I could. A morbid curiosity overcame me as I came to the same bend where the phantom automobile had vanished. I reduced my speed and looked about in the dark, hoping to spot something. Perhaps the car with its lights off was parked on the shoulder, where it had turned around. There might have been tire tracks in the dirt. Nothing was present. There was nobody on the road, no driveways, no concealed turnoffs, no side roads. Automobile could not have gone anywhere at all. It had just stopped existing. My eyes darted to my rearview mirror every few seconds as I drove the remaining distance down Clinton Road in a chilly sweat, half expecting to see those silent flashing lights again. They didn't. I felt a sense of relief, so strong it made me dizzy, when I finally emerged from the trees and saw the bright, lovely, everyday lights of Route 23. I did not head directly to the yard. The first 24-hour truck stop was where I drove in. I spotted the parking lot, a haven of noise and brightness. My trailer was parked, but I didn't turn off the engine. I required the noise, the tremor, and the evidence of my own firm mechanical existence, just to be around people, to hear the clatter of dishes and the murmur of conversation. I staggered into the diner and ordered a coffee I didn't want. At last, I returned to the yard, just as the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, illuminating the sky with grey and orange hues. A man named S, who had been driving since the beginning of time, was there preparing his truck for an early run. He was one of the other old-timers. He glanced at my tired, pale face. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Ed," he remarked as he sipped slowly from his steaming coffee cup made of styrofoam. The words lingered in the atmosphere. With a trembling breath, I made a sound that was half sob, half giggle. "Even worse, S," I said in a voice that was foreign to my own. I believe one pulled me over. I told him everything. I thought he would chuckle, give me a shoulder pat, and advise me to get more rest. However, he didn't. As I spoke, he simply listened carefully, his expression solemn, and he nodded slowly. He remained still for a while after I was done, gazing off into space as though he were witnessing a memory unfold. So he said, "Clinton Road, right?" Unable to talk, I simply nodded. "Yeah," he responded in a gruff, low voice. They say he never really clocked out, and some quiet nights he's still on patrol, still trying to finish his last stop, still looking for the car that got away. I've heard that one before, more than once. The story goes that a state trooper was killed on that road way back sometime in the 1960s, I believe, when he pulled over a car for a routine stop and the driver ambushed him, shot him, and left him for dead. The words struck me like a physical blow. The old Crown Victoria, the distorted vintage radio call about a pursuit, the antiquated winding siren. I was stopped by a memory, not for speeding or a broken tail light, but for a violent tragic echo that was imprinted on that lonely stretch of road, a psychic loop that would forever repeat itself and trap anyone unlucky enough to fit the profile. An empty rig, a lone driver in the dead of night. And I'm a man who respects the law. It's tangible. It's written down. It makes sense. I broke the speed limit getting off Clinton Road that night, but I know that phantom officer wasn't going to write me a ticket because he was looking for someone else, a ghost from his own past, and I thank God with all my heart that he finally realized it wasn't me. That night, however, I learned that other laws, older and stranger ones, govern the dark places of the world. Dark places of the world. You can call me Clara Jennings. My life is between the painted lines of the American highway, and I am 36 years old. To put it formally, I am my own boss, my own dispatcher, and my own mechanic when things get rough. I am an independent hauler. My home and business partner is my rig, a vintage 1998 Kenworth W900L. I refer to her as Kenny. Her sleeper cab is more comfy than any flat I've ever rented, and she's a gorgeous creature of chrome and deep purple paint. That truck is more than a piece of equipment. My ticket to freedom is her. I accept the positions I desire. I go where I'd want, and the delivery deadline is the only person to whom I answer. I am a nocturnal creature. It has always been. Driving at a time when everyone else is asleep has a certain enchantment. The roads are deserted. The music on the radio is better, and it seems to be just you, your truck, and the unending dark asphalt ribbon that stretches out in the direction of an invisible horizon. It's an isolated life. You see things while you're alone. The way a mountain hole might be swallowed by fog, a meteor blazing across Nebraska's plains with an unsettling green hue. In a far-off storm, the odd, silent dance of heat lightning. I've seen a number of odd things on nothing in my 36 years, save those lonely nights. I've driven over 1 million miles, but nothing could have prepared me for the diner on Clinton Road's delicate, unbelievable, and incredibly unnerving compassion. The night in the first week of December was dreadful, the sort of evening that causes you to reevaluate your professional decisions. A cold rain was pouring, a foul, sneaky concoction of water and ice that was intent on making the entire world a dazzling, dangerous trap. It wasn't rain, which is just damp, or snow, which can be lovely. Every surface was covered in a gloss, a smooth, imperceptible layer of pure hate. The irony was not lost on me. I was carrying a bunch of Christmas ornaments. My trailer was crammed with miles of tinsel, boxes upon boxes of delicate glass ornaments, and artificial trees. From a large warehouse in eastern Pennsylvania to a chain of department stores dotted throughout New England, the delivery window was extremely constrained. For the weekend rush, they needed this product on the shelves. The major roadways, of course, were a living hell. It was a demolition derby on I-84 and I-87 because of the freezing rain. Accident reports and terrified screams filled the CB radio. Road closures, multi-car jams, and jackknifed rigs. Not only was my delivery schedule blown, it was destroyed. I could feel the frustration coiling in my stomach as I sat at a dead stop and watched the ice accumulate on my windshield wipers. I was worn out. A hunger that had long since transcended irritation and moved into the realm of actual pain was growling in my gut. Additionally, I was losing money every minute I sat motionless. I took out my battered road atlas, the material familiar and soft to the touch. I traced the routes with my finger and spread it on my enormous steering wheel. I had to find a way out of the problem. There it was, a faint blue line that nearly the map's footnote wound through a large, dark green region of northern New Jersey. The road was in a county, Clinton Road. The name was familiar to me. The moniker is familiar to all East Coast truckers. There is a boogeyman, a folklore, ghostly people, phantom trucks, and an overall sense of fear. Even the most cynical old-timers steer clear of it like the plague. However, based on the map, it was my only practical choice. More or less, it was a straight trip to a still open roadway. In addition to my need, I had a tiny, rebellious curiosity. The stories had been told to me for years. Perhaps they decided that my large, cozy, well-lit Kenworth was a sufficiently safe bubble for me to travel in, and it was time for me to see the place by myself. I had survived inner city riots, floods, and blizzards thanks to Kenny. She could manage one frightening road, surely. I made my way via the back roads off the highway, and the Clinton Road turnoff was as plain as it was foreboding. My large rig hole was devoured by a small, black mouth. The transformation was immediate. The thermometer appeared to dip a couple of degrees. The landscape outside my taxi turned into a sleet and black whirlpool. The road was worse than I had anticipated. The already shoddy asphalt had turned into a strip of black ice due to the freezing rain. It was similar to driving on greasy windshields. Over the road, the old, massive trees with a glistening layer of ice drooped low. Their branches shrieked and scratched against my trailer's roof like skeletal arms. A continual graded reminder of how near and dangerous the woodland was. The sound was a nerve-wracking symphony of fingernails on a chalkboard. My speedometer needle was barely hovering at 10 miles per hour as I crawled. I felt stiff all over, one tightly wound muscle of focus. Every slight adjustment of the steering wheel and each light brake tap was a risky move. My jaw was tight, my knuckles were white, and I was struggling to prevent 80,000 pounds of truck, trailer, and Christmas cheer from jackknifing into a tree or sliding into a ditch. I was beginning to regret my choice after an hour or so of this soul-crushing, white-knuckle driving. A cold, gnawing fear had long since replaced the interest. I was ravenous, fatigued, and my eyes were burning from the intense focus of peering into the sleepy, mesmerizing blackness. My stomach's faint aching had turned into a searing, persistent one. It had been about 12 hours since I last ate. For a moment, I closed my eyes and dreamed about a steaming cup of coffee, the acrid heat seeping into my chest. A grilled cheese sandwich sprang to mind, the straightforward, ideal comfort of buttery toasted bread with melting cheese. It was a terrible, stupid daydream. I found myself in the middle of nowhere during a freezing blizzard on a scary road. There was absolutely no hope of finding food. I saw it at that moment. Initially, it was only a dim, hazy light visible through the heavy, churning layers of icy rain. I blinked, supposing it to be a trick of my weary eyes or a reflection. However, it became stronger and more distinct. The bright glow was enticing and pleasant. My heart began to beat a little quicker as I drew nearer. The form forced itself to emerge from the shadows. The place was a diner. Right on the side of this abandoned, desolate road was a magnificent example of a 1950s-style railroad car diner. It was a fantasy of light and chrome, and impossible. It had what appeared to be red vinyl booths, a long counter visible inside, and large plate glass windows that stared out into the rain. In the window, a plain neon sign buzzed softly, forming a single lovely word with its warm ruby red glow. Consume. It was illogical. It isn't possible. 4 miles in all directions. There were no houses, no other structures, and no indications of life. On a night like tonight, a perfectly functional diner in the middle of nothing. It was just not conceivable. My initial reasonable assumption was that I was finally losing it. My brain decided to summon the thing I most wanted, because I was so hungry and tired. The sight was a mirage, but everything appeared so authentic. A shimmering pool of warmth and protection was created in the hostile chilly night as the light from its windows flowed out onto the icy road. From a silver vent on the roof, I could see real steam emerging before vanishing into the drowsy, black air. My desperation overcame my incredulity because the sight was so inviting and so incredibly real. The battle against my logical thinking was won by my hunger and fatigue. It might have been a mirage, but it was the most lovely and hopeful one I had ever seen. I had no intention of simply driving by it. I started to carefully maneuver my rig off the perilous road and into the tiny, deserted parking area next to the diner. I could hear the crunch of the ice-covered stones beneath my tires on the gravel lot. The loud, familiar sound seemed to reverberate in the still night as I pulled the air brake, a sign of arrival. When I killed the engine, there was a tremendous pause. I sat there looking at the diner for a long time. The Haven was its name. On the main window, immediately below the neon sign, the name was painted in a bright, tasteful white script. It appeared too flawless, too obvious. It was either a divine sign or an extremely odd trap. I was too hungry at the time to give a damn. With my hands shaking a little from the cold and adrenaline, I reached for my wallet and coat. I inhaled deeply and said a brief prayer on my lips, then pushed my cab's heavy door open. It felt like a bodily slap from the cold. My hair was immediately soaked by the unrelenting freezing rain, which left me feeling completely chilled. However, I was motivated to move forward by the prospect of the hot supper and warmth that might be waiting for me just 50 feet away. With my boots slipping a little, I shuffled across the freezing gravel and grabbed for the glass door of the diner. I opened it. Above my head, a tiny bell, a genuine, actual bell, chimed joyfully. A flood of delightful warmth and the most amazing smell had ever smelled hit me at once. It was the thick, earthy aroma of coffee brewing, the salty, savory smell of bacon, and the holy trinity of dining scents. Pancakes or waffles, something sweet and comforting, and something sizzling on a griddle. The interior was just as it had seemed from the outside, except it was more vivid and real. A row of red vinyl swivel stools that appeared brand new stood in front of a long, immaculate chrome counter that shone in the warm sunshine. The large windows were lined with cozy pillows, upholstered in the same cheery crimson. A vintage Wurliter jukebox that was gleaming in the corner was playing a leisurely, lovely melody, and the air was filled with the soothing, mellow, jazzy notes of a saxophone. The floor had a classic black and white checkerboard pattern that was so clean it sparkled. The place was deserted. There are no patrons or cooks in the rear, only one individual. With her back to me, a woman stood behind the counter, using a fresh white towel to gently wipe down the previously spotless surface. With a tidy bun of grey hair fastened at the nape of her neck, she was most likely in her late 60s. Under a spotless white apron tied in a flawless bow at her back, she wore a straightforward dark-coloured dress. The bell rung, and she turned, a warm, sincere smile spreading across her face. She had the kind of eyes that had seen a lot, but had decided to stay soft, crinkly at the corners, but kind nonetheless. "Come on in out of that nasty weather, honey," she replied. Her voice had a little vintage lilt, and was warm and soothing. It was the voice of every benevolent aunt and beloved granny. "You can sit anywhere you want and hang your coat on the hook there. You look partially frozen." My shoulders, which had been tense around my ears for the past hour, started to relax. I slid into the closest booth, the one by the window, and hung my soaking coat on a large metal hook beside the entrance. My weary back felt cold and comfortable against the red vinyl. From behind the counter, the woman emerged with a large, heavy white ceramic mug in one hand and a laminated menu in the other. She set the mug on the table and poured hot black coffee from a glass pot into it. She introduced herself as I'm Flo, with a constant smile. The menu was straightforward. "What can I get for you, dear?" Classic diner fare, one page. All-day breakfast, sandwiches and burgers. Simple, delicious meal without elaborate labels or gourmet ingredients. I immediately looked at it. May I please have tomato soup on the side with my grilled cheese? It seemed like the world's most ideal, most opulent supper. Flo smiled warmly once more and continued, "A great choice for a night like this. It's coming up." With a subtle, efficient grace, she returned behind the counter after taking the menu. I heard the sizzle of butter on a hot griddle and the clink of a bowl. I took a drink of the coffee, encircling the warm ceramic mug with my icy hands. I can honestly say that it was the greatest coffee I had ever tasted. It had no traces of bitterness and was rich, powerful, and incredibly smooth. It seemed as though it had been made especially for me at that very moment. In order to dispel the remaining chill, I took another long, leisurely drink and let the warmth to permeate throughout my chest. I took another glance around the diner, attempting to make sense of its tactile actuality and impossibility. The place was spotless. The checkerboard flooring were visible, and the chrome shone in the gentle illumination. Each table had a full, well-maintained salt and pepper shaker. Not a single stray crumb or dust particle was there. Like a museum display of the ideal 1950s restaurant, everything seemed preserved. However, it also felt very safe, lively, and real. An overwhelming and incomprehensible sense of calm took the place of the tension and fear that had been my constant companions on the slippery drive. Despite the fact that I had never been here before, it felt familiar. Flo brought my lunch over on a large plate a few minutes later. The grilled cheese was a masterwork, and the soup was a rich, deep red that was simmering in its bowl. As I separated the two halves, I noticed that the bread was thick and buttery, perfectly golden brown, and had a satisfyingly gooey string of melted cheddar extending from it. Although the cuisine was modest, it was prepared with a level of love and attention that I hadn't seen in a long time. It had a nostalgic flavor. It had the flavor of a home-cooked supper prepared by a kind adult when I was a child. Flo leaned her elbows on the counter and looked at me, saying, "It seems like you're the only one brave enough to be on the road tonight." "It feels good," I murmured, my mouth full of buttery, delicious goodness. I took a swallow. "The weather is awful right now. I'm shocked that you're even willing." "There isn't a lot of business out here," Flo grinned, but it was a somewhat different smile. "A little melancholy, a little longing," she said. "Oh, we're always open for those who need us." I was too comfortable, too weary, and too happy to question it, even though it was a weird, cryptic way to phrase it. It seemed real. While I was eating, we spoke for a while. The talk flowed easily and comfortably. I told her about my run, and how ridiculous it was to drag Christmas decorations through a bitterly cold place. That made her laugh. When I told her about my purple Kenworth, her eyes brightened and she inquired about my truck. She seems to truly enjoy the elegance of a vintage rig. She then shared stories with me about the diner and the patrons that used to visit. She always used the past tense when speaking, which I noticed with a little disinterested curiosity. She described the time before the construction of the large interstates, when the road was a busy artery and a major thoroughfare. She told of a period when her cafe was a beacon in the night for other truckers like me, when families were traveling to the Jersey Shore for vacation, and when troops were returning from the war. She talked about what seemed like a very long time ago, a snapshot in black and white of an extinct world. She remarked, "This road has seen a lot of stories," as she peered out the window at the storm that was beyond her line of sight from behind the bar. "A lot of joy and a lot of sorrow. It holds on two things. I scraped the soup bowl clean after eating my last bite. I started to feel a deeper, more bone-weary tiredness than before. The diner's warmth, the hot food in my stomach, and the jazzy, gentle music were all powerful seditious agents. I had the sensation that lead weights were fastened to my eyelids." She spoke softly and compassionately. "You look all done in, honey," and Flo seemed to notice. "Your eyes are fatigued. How about giving them a little rest? You won't be bothered by anyone here. You're secure." It was physically excruciating to consider getting back into my pickup and heading out into the cold and onto that dangerous sheet of ice. The diner was cozy and secure, and the booth was quite cozy. I knew I shouldn't. In a customer's booth, A trucker never takes a nap. It's not professional. However, it didn't feel like a typical workplace. It had the feel of a haven. My voice was heavy with sleep, and I muttered, just for a few minutes. My head rested on the cool, smooth vinyl of the seat back as I slipped down in the booth. I shut my eyes. The saxophone's lovely, melancholy melody from the jukebox and the soft, repetitive clinking of flow as they cleaned up behind the bar were the last sounds I heard. A startling, chilly, grey light on my screen jolted me up. My face, my eyes were blurry and gritted as I blinked. I was confused and my head was cloudy. I was nowhere near a cozy diner. I was in my pickup. I was leaning awkwardly over my Kenworth's enormous steering wheel. I screamed in protest, my neck stiff. My shoulder, where it had been crushed against the driver's side door, emitted a faint agony. With my heart hammering between my ribs, I sat up straight. I couldn't understand. Was it all in my dream? The wonderful grilled cheese, the cafe, the warmth, and the sweet woman named Flo. It had been so vividly real, so overwhelming. The coffee's taste, noises, and scents. I peered out the window. I had parked on the side of Clinton Road in the same muddy area where I had done so just hours earlier. The icy rain had ceased. A heavy layer of gloomy clouds was blocking out the pale, watery winter sun. Except for the sound of water trickling from the ice-covered trees, everything was quiet. My gaze immediately went to the location where the diner had been. Nothing was there. It wasn't merely boarded up, dark, or shuttered. It was gone. Dark, or shuttered. It was gone. Totally and totally gone. The old crumbling stone foundation, filled with dead weeds and skeletal ice-covered saplings, was all that remained of the warm, brilliant chrome and neon edifice. The ancient remains appeared to have been abandoned for at least 50 years, and the unrelenting forest was gradually reclaiming them. There were only ruins, no broken neon signs, no building, and no indication of a gravel parking lot. My chest pounded with my heart. It must have been a dream, a strong, detailed hallucination induced by hunger and great fatigue. There was no other rational explanation. I was on the verge of accepting that and dismissing it as an odd ploy by a weary mind. Moment I noticed it. A thick white ceramic mug sat upright on my passenger seat, positioned precisely in the middle of the cushion. Flo had offered my coffee in the same hefty, cozy mug. I touched it, my hand shaking as I extended out. Despite being empty, it still felt faintly, unfathomably warm to the touch, and the small piece of yellowed paper was folded neatly in half next to it. An invoice. My throat tightened each breath. I grabbed it. The paper was substantial and fragile, as if it were really old. A lovely, sophisticated, vintage cursive script was used to handwrite the receipt. There was no tax or total. It said, 1 grilled cheese, 1 tomato soup, 1 coffee. A little note was written at the bottom of the slip in the same elegant handwriting. Paid in full. Have a safe trip, my love. I looked at the note, then at the empty, warm mug, and finally back out my window at the overgrown ancient ruins. It wasn't a dream. It was authentic. Everything. A diner that didn't exist was where I'd spent the night, served by a woman who had no right to be present. A diner that is haunted. A refuge. A port during a storm for a weary and lost truck driver on a powerless evening. It wasn't frightening. It's different from the other stories you hear about this route, which are full of fear and hate. This was both exquisite and incredibly odd. In a country known for its gloom, there came a moment of soft tenderness that seemed unimaginable. It was a moment in time, a fond recollection that had solidified for me alone for a few hours. I placed the handwritten receipt and the ceramic mug among my maps and registration papers in my glove compartment with great care and reverence. They are my mementos from a non-existent location, my evidence of an unbelievable evening. The most reassuring sound in the world was Kenny's engine roaring when I turned it on. I retreated onto the road. The ice had started to thaw in the daylight. The sun shone a bit more. Once more, the road was just a road. The nature of the haven is unknown to me. A slide of time, a type of collective memory of a nicer period, a guardian angel shaped like a dining room. As of right now, I have no answers. and I doubt I ever will. However, I am certain that it rescued me. It provided me with a hot dinner when I was hungry, a secure place to sleep when I was worn out, and a tale that I will always remember. And occasionally, I'll pull over and open my glove compartment on a long, lonely night when the miles seem to go on forever, and the world seems cold and empty. The flavor of the exquisite coffee, the unfathomable warmth, and the generosity of a ghost named Flo in a cafe that only remains open till dawn will all come back to me when I pull out that old ceramic mug. Samuel Hall is my name. I've been a truck driver for over 30 years, and I'm 55. I am a creature of routine and habit. I listen to the same vintage rock stations, eat at the same diners, and drive the same routes. My rig is a moving fortress of solitude and my haven. One of my cardinal rules has been instilled in truckers for many years. You never pick up people who are hitchhiking. It's a liability and a safety concern. You have no idea what they are running from, who they are, or what they are carrying. I had never broken that rule. Not till that evening, the night I disobeyed my own rule on a path where reason and reasoning are no longer relevant. It was one of those beautiful, crisp autumn nights when the air is so pure and frigid that it seems like it may break. I was traveling through northern New Jersey on a routine journey with a load of dry goods. The roar of the engine was a reassuring companion, and I was feeling good and ahead of schedule. Then there was the radio call, an interstate traffic jam with several cars, a total shutdown. A diversion was recommended by my dispatcher, a young child who was overly dependent on his computer. Clinton Road was the name displayed on the screen. The name was familiar to me. I'd worked as a truck driver long enough to hear all the wild stories about the ghost boy, the phantom trucks, and the weird lights. They had always made me laugh. I found fatigue driving and black ice to be the most frightening things on the road. The dispatcher, however, was certain there was no other way to prevent hours of being stuck. I reluctantly consented. The road was just as eerie as its name implied, through a jungle so black that it seemed to consume the light from my high beams. A narrow, winding ribbon of asphalt sliced through. The most unsettling aspect was the quiet. There were no houses or other vehicles, only the lonesome sound of my truck passing through the quiet forest. It seemed to be a lost region of the earth, a place beyond time. When I saw him, I had been driving for maybe 15 minutes with my hands firmly gripping the wheel. A figure of a hitchhiker, thumb out, standing on the slender grassy shoulder. He was but a shadow among the shadowy trees. His figure was lit by my headlights as I approached. He wore a long dark coat that appeared excessively thick for the weather, and he was tall and skinny. His face was hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, and his head was bent. Every instinct, training year, and life experience begged me to continue. Keep going. Don't even reduce your speed. It's the regulation. But I hesitated for a reason. Perhaps it was the road's intense loneliness. Being out here on foot in the middle of the night is a scene of utter misery. The dude must be having a lot of problems. Miles ago, his car must have broken down. Out here, he could freeze to death. I felt a twinge of pity against my better judgment, a glimmer of human decency that would turn out to be a disastrous error. The air brakes hissed like a scared serpent as I slowed the truck. I pulled over approximately 20 feet past him, leaving the engine running. As he made his way to the cab, I observed him in my side mirror. His feet seemed to hardly touch the floor as he walked in an odd gliding fashion. He approached the door on the passenger side. I rolled down the window and leaned over. The night air rushes in, chilly. "You need a ride?" With a rough voice, I inquired. He looked up, but his face was still obscured by the shadow cast by his hat. Where his feature should have been, all I saw was a dark, empty space. His words, "I would be most grateful," were clear. He had an odd voice, like dried leaves skittering across concrete. It was a faint, scratchy murmur. His age could not be determined. It had a sound that was simultaneously fresh and old. "Where are you headed?" My hand was still hovering close to the gear change, about to pull away, when I asked. He murmured, just down the road. There's a turn off. When I see it, I'll know it." It was ambiguous, but there weren't many choices on this path. I paused for another moment. I had already stopped, despite my intuition telling me this was wrong. Now it seemed more sensible to drive away. "Okay." I let out a sigh. Enter. No funny business, though. He didn't respond. He simply slid into the passenger seat after opening the door. An odd cool air and the slight musty smell of damp ground and old books immediately filled the cab. With a gentle click, he shut the door and sat motionless. His face was still obscured by the shadows cast by his hat, and his hands were clasped in his lap. After shifting the truck into gear, I resumed driving. There was an overwhelming hush in the taxi. The man remained motionless and silent. Like a statue of shadows, he simply sat there. I made an effort to talk in order to break the eerie silence. "The vehicle broke down," I inquired. "I don't drive," he said in a murmur that seemed to emanate from everywhere. "All right. Where are you coming from, then?" He remained quiet for a while. "A place that no longer exists," he rasped at the end. I was beginning to feel very uneasy about the cryptic responses. I gave him a quick look. He had remained still. I could see he wasn't seeing the road even though he was looking straight ahead. He had his eyes on something else, somewhere far. I saw that he was wearing an old-fashioned coat made of black, heavy wool. The earth had been damp, but it wasn't wet, and it looked like something from a history book. "You live around here?" My voice was tight as I tried again. He muttered, "I am a frequent visitor." There was no progress in the talk, and every hushed response made me feel more uneasy. I chose to just drive and stop talking, in the hopes that some music would break the stifling atmosphere. I switched on the radio. The instant that when the music began to play, the man made a small, barely noticeable movement. He muttered, "Would you mind?" and made an ambiguous gesture toward the radio. "The noise is distracting." I switched it off. The oppressive stillness came again, thicker than ever. Now I was really afraid. This individual wasn't typical. This man wasn't only in need of a lift. I had a racing heart. I wished for him to leave my truck. "So, this turn off," I spoke, attempting to maintain a steady tone. "Is it coming up soon?" "Soon," he croaked. "You have to feel it. It's not a spot you can locate on a map. It's a path that leads to nothing." I wanted to ask, away from what, but I was too terrified of the response. For what seemed like an age, we drove in quiet. The road wound in a hypnotic, never-ending circle of darkness. I began to feel confused. I had no idea how far I had driven or how long I had been traveling. Then the man spoke once more, his voice piercing the quiet. "There," he murmured, gesturing to the woods on the right with a long, pale finger. "Right there." I decelerated, searching for a path, a road, anything. There was only a sturdy, impassable wall of old trees and nothing more. My voice trembled a little when I said, "There's nothing there, maybe to you," he said, "but I'm stopping. Let me out here, please." I didn't require two reminders. The tractor screeched to a stop in the center of the road as I stomped on the brakes. If another automobile arrived, I didn't care. Now I wanted him gone. In that same scratchy, dry voice, he continued, "Thank you for the ride." He walked out into the dark after opening the door. He didn't turn around. He simply moved in the direction of the tree line. I kept my breath hard in my chest as I watched him, expecting the woods to engulf him, but they didn't. As he approached the trees, a walkway appeared where there ought to have been sturdy trunks and dense underbrush. The route wasn't made of gravel and dirt. The world itself seemed to open up for him. Before him, a dim grey light trailed indistinctly and shimmered, extending far into the dark interior of the woodland. It was a journey to nowhere, a road of gloom and moonlight. Without hesitation, he stepped onto it, and the blackness engulfed him. After the path vanished, the woods were once more just forests. I was blown away as I sat there. My hands were shaking so much from hyperventilation that I was unable to hold onto the driving wheel. I had just observed something non-human stroll down a road that didn't exist after I had given him a ride. With my foot pressing the accelerator to the floor, I was able to finally get the vehicle moving. I didn't care about the curves or the bumps. I drove at a desperate, reckless speed. I simply had to leave. I looked at the passenger seat as I went down the road, half expecting to find him still seated there. Even when the seat was unoccupied, the cold persisted, a strong, strange chill that appeared to have seeped into the vinyl. There was also a solitary dead leaf on the seat where he had been sitting. It was a dark, brittle oak leaf, the kind that appears long after the other leaves have fallen to dust in the dead of winter. I kept my hands off of it. I had no desire to. It served as a memento, and a reminder of he had transported a portion of the other location inside my truck. Passenger. The first well-lit truck stop I came across was on the major highway, where I eventually got off Clinton Road. I got out, left the engine running, and stood in the artificial light, taking in the aromas of the real-world greasy food and diesel. In the hopes that the musty, frigid air would depart my cab, I opened the passenger door and kept it open for over an hour. I kept the whole story to myself. I knew what I saw, but I only claimed to have had a strange affair. By breaking my one rule, I lent a ride to a ghost, a being that travels between worlds, or a creature that follows secret routes. I observed a hitchhiker go home, and they're picking him up when he requested for a ride to nowhere. And even now, I can't get rid of the idea that a piece of that old whispering darkness is still traveling with me. And the passenger seat in my truck occasionally seems abnormally cold. Janet Cole is my name. My age is 32. I am referred to as a hot shot trucker. I'm not a big 18-wheeler driver. I own a 40-foot gooseneck trailer, a Ram 3500, and a heavy-duty pickup. Smaller, urgent loads that must arrive there yesterday. Specialty. Expedited freight. I enjoy my fast-paced, high-stress profession. Driving all night is something I'm used to. Pushing myself to the limit in my truck. I can solve problems. I discover a way around closed roads. I have no fear of the dark. Or I wasn't, anyway. Before Clinton Road, that is. Not until I discovered that some objects that move in the dark are actually the shadow itself, not simply a shadow. The night was a hot July night. It felt like you were breathing water because of how humid the air was. I was transporting a specially made metal component from a shop in rural Pennsylvania to a Boston shipyard. It was an important component. It was awaiting the completion of a repair by an entire team. A delay at the fabrication shop had already put me behind schedule. Every minute mattered. The interstate was a disaster, of course. All northbound lanes were closed due to a tanker fire. I was on a crazy goose chase through a tangle of suburban streets while my GPS, which is usually my greatest buddy, was desperately attempting to redirect me. I searched for a more direct route on the map, frustrated. I noticed a dark, narrow line that appeared to go right through the chaos. Clinton Road. Though they were merely rumors, I had heard rumors about it. I had a deadline and was a professional. Ghost stories were not something I had time for. It was my time. Immediately, the mood shifted. The stifling humidity gave way to a damp, clammy coldness as the temperature dropped. The road was a narrow, tree-lined tunnel. In the pitch-black darkness, my headlights hardly made a dent. Normally, my truck felt so strong and sturdy, but now it felt little and exposed. My senses were at full alert, and I was on high alert. I was even more frustrated because I had to maintain a low speed on the uneven and bumpy route. It happened as I was negotiating a very steep bend. There was a brief movement on my truck's passenger side. I looked over, supposing it was a big bird or a branch. Neither was it. It was a shadow, but there was nothing casting a shadow. It was a substantial shadow, a fragment of the night that had separated from the others. It had long, lanky limbs, was tall and abnormally thin, and had a somewhat humanoid shape. It was also in motion. In the thick forest, it was running at the same speed as my truck. As it swerved around bushes and trees, its shape changed and twisted with a terrifying fluid elegance. It was not running in a human manner. It was pouring like darkness in liquid form. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. It must have been a light trick. There was an odd reflection of my headlights off the trees. I blinked vigorously to get rid of it, but it persisted. Through the woods, a solid, three-dimensional emptiness of darkness. Then it did something that totally broke my denial. It jumped in one impossible leap, had landed on the tarmac directly beside my truck after clearing the ditch and the side of the road. There was no hit, no sound. It arrived just now. Now, its featureless head was level with my window as it ran on the pavement directly next to my passenger door. I let out a yell. It was a guttural, uncontrollable shout of sheer horror. The strong diesel engine roared in protest as I stamped on the accelerator. The truck roared ahead, but the shadow followed with ease. I couldn't get rid of the dark reflection that seemed to be attached to me. My heart pounded frantically against my ribs as I gazed at it. It lacked any features, including a face and eyes. It was a hole in the world, a flawless silhouette. However, I sensed it observing me. On the inside of my cab, I could sense its icy, vacant concentration just on me. Then it made a move toward the truck. Its body extended into a long, spindly arm of pure blackness. The hand, a shapeless claw of darkness, grasped onto the bottom of my passenger side window as the arm extended, breaking the laws of physics. I heard a noise, followed by a low scraping sound that sounded like metal being dragged. It was the sound of its body striking my door's sturdy steel. There was no hallucination here. It was authentic. My automobile was being touched by it. It started to climb with a terrifying spider-like agility. It pulled itself up the side of the door by holding onto the window. Reaching aloft, another dark limb seized the roof rack. It was getting up on my moving van. I was going crazy. I was shouting, but the pounding in my ears drowned out my voice. I violently swerved the truck to the trying to shrug it off. I went to the left, then the right. The tires screeched in protest as the trailer fishtailed behind me. However, with its undulating form and unyielding hold, the shadow clung to the side of my truck as if it were a part of it. It raised its head above the window line by pulling itself up. It looked into the cab below. I heard a voice as I looked up at a faceless head of utter blackness, a chasm peering down at me. The voice didn't reach my ears. A voice, a chilly, lifeless murmur that eschewed sound altogether, blossomed inside my mind. Leave. The two words were an eviction notice and a command. It desired my truck. It desired my personal space. It desired to be inside. A wave of sheer defiant wrath replaced the terror. This monster was refusing to go into my truck, which was my haven. I let out my own guttural yell and jerked the steering wheel sharply to the right, aiming for a huge oak tree with thick branches that stood directly at the edge of the road. I had a crazy scheme. Suicidal. I was going to damage my automobile in order to shear it off. I closed my eyes for a moment, bracing for contact. There was a loud shriek of shredding metal and splintering wood when my truck's passenger side scraped against the tree. As the entire truck trembled fiercely, I was flung against my door. Branches grabbed at the window, one of them shattering the glass as the side mirror erupted. However, the effect had been successful. I turned to look. The gloom had vanished. It must have been displaced by the force of the impact and the collision with something substantial and solid. I failed to witness its fall. I didn't witness it fleeing. It simply vanished. I continued. I was unable to. I continued driving, my truck groaning and beaten, my passenger glass a web of cracks. My tears were a sloppy, frantic mix of relief and terror. The lights felt like a sacred haven as I pulled into a petrol station. I had left Clinton Road and returned to the world of street lights and civilization. With trembling legs, I exited the truck and examined the damage. The passenger side was in disarray. They scraped off the paint. The metal of the truck bedside and the door had long, deep gouges in it. The side mirror had vanished entirely. It appeared as though I had sideswiped a huge tree, which I did, because a heavy branch was still lodged in the roof rack. However, I discovered something more as I rubbed the damage with my shaking palm. There were other marks among the tree's dents and scratches. Directly beneath the window are 5 parallel gouges, unnaturally straight and thin. They had scratched the metal all the way down to the primer. The tree wasn't the source of them. They felt cool to the touch, but they resembled claw marks. Unbelievably chilly. I completed the Boston delivery. Despite being late, I arrived. I informed the firm that I had fallen asleep while driving and collided with a tree. Compared to trying to explain the truth, it was simpler. They made me pay for the repairs and placed me on probation. I continue to drive. I continue to run the hot shot. However, that night, I underwent a transformation. The dark no longer frightens me. What moves within of it terrifies me. I now know that shadows are more than merely the lack of illumination. A few of them are starving. They're waiting, some of them. And I came across one who wanted to get in on a pitch-black New Jersey road. And I can prove it with the scars on my soul and my truck. And I can prove it with the scars on my soul and my truck. Robert King is my name. I am a 44-year-old tanker driver. I smell gasoline. My work requires accuracy, concentration, and a fair dose of deference to the 8,000 gallons of explosive liquid I'm transporting. Making mistakes is out of your price range. You cannot afford to become disoriented. You must have faith in your direction, your senses, and your maps. I've always been really good at finding my way around. I'm capable of navigating even the most intricate city grids and perplexing back roads in rural areas. Never in my life have I felt so lost. You can't navigate Clinton Road, though. It's a location that guides you. It's a maze with no barriers, a trap. And it decided it wasn't done with me that night. It was a late autumn night, cloudy and without a moon. The type of night that shrouds something. I was traveling to a small upstate New York town for a pre-dawn delivery at a 24-hour gas station. A rock avalanche, which happens frequently in that steep region of the state, blocked my customary route. After consulting my atlas, I came across what appeared to be a suitable, albeit convoluted, detour. Cleveland Road. Of course, I had heard the name. There are a lot of stories about it on the trucker grapevine, but I'm a realist. I believed that a road was a road. The first indication that this path was unique was the fog. It was not a fog of nature. It rolled in quickly and thickly, a curtain of silence that smothered my headlights and made it nearly impossible to see. Swirling in fascinating, confusing patterns, it clung to the road. With my eyes straining to follow the thin painted line on the asphalt's border, I had to slow my tanker to a crawl. I drove slowly and tensely for what seemed like an hour before I passed a little, ordinary concrete bridge. I thought it was part of the reservoir because it spanned over a quiet, dark body of water. I saw it as a turning point and an indication of advancement. I continued driving as the road wound its way into the dark, thick forest. The fog persisted, and the only sound to break the stifling calm was my engine's low growl. I drove for another 20 or 30 minutes. It was difficult to tell. In the fog, time seems to bend. I was starting to feel nervous because I thought I should have arrived at the end of the route by now. Any indication of civilization or a change in the landscape was what I was searching for. Then I noticed a bridge in the distance. Another milestone was the slight sensation of relaxation I had. It indicated that I was still improving. I experienced an odd sense of déjà vu as I drew closer. The bridge appeared to be familiar. A dark body of water was crossed by a little concrete structure. The bridge I had crossed 30 minutes prior was exactly like this one. That's weird. I shook my head and said, must be a standard design for this area. Dispelling the eerie similarity from my thoughts, I drove on and crossed the bridge. Through the fog-choked forest, the road resumed its winding course. With my eyes fixed on the road, I drove and drove. On my left, I came upon a recognizable oak tree that was scarred by lightning. On my right, I came to a little muddy pull-off. I continued to drive as the minutes passed. I had a strong feeling that I must be nearing the end of my life. Then I made out the distinct outline of a bridge through the whirling fog. My blood froze. It isn't possible. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I brought the tanker to a near stop. The bridge, the concrete arch, and the dark water below were all the same. There was no way. I hadn't looked back. There was no fork in the road. My driving had been straight. Panic started to build in my throat. Then I reached for my CB radio. Breaker 1N, is there anyone on this desolate road? Does anyone have a copy? Static was the only response. I said in a shaky voice, this is a joke. There must be a joke here. With my thoughts racing, I crossed the bridge once more. I was a man of reason. A logical explanation had to exist. The road might have been a loop. It felt too tiny for a picturesque circle that my map didn't depict. I hadn't been on the road long enough to do a big enough loop. I made the decision to listen more intently. I would seek evidence. Keeping my senses sharp, I continued to drive. The lightning-scarred oak tree on my left was back. On my right, the muddy pull-off a few minutes later. My stomach turned over into a knot. The road I was on was the same one. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as I continued to drive. A desperate hope fighting a growing wave of fear. I hoped that things would be different this time, that the road would take me out this time. Then I noticed the bridge. Out of the gloom, like a reoccurring nightmare, it was waiting for me. The tanker groaned to a stop just in front of the bridge's entrance as I stomped on the brakes. I was unable to do it. I was unable to cross it once again. I was confined. I was trapped in a loop, a reality malfunction, a segment of the road that kept repeating. I was not getting anywhere on the road. All it was doing was taking me back to this bridge, to the beginning. I sat there for a while, the fog circling my cab like lost spirits, the motor idling. The panic died down and was replaced by a creeping, chilly dread. It was not a natural occurrence. This was what the road was doing. It was teasing me. I was its victim, caught in its labyrinth, and it was a predator. I considered going back, but why would I do that? What would the road back lead to if the path forward led back here? Would it simply be an extended loop? Would it just keep twisting and spinning until I ran out of fuel, refusing to let me go? I could not have imagined how dreadful it would be to be stuck here in this never-ending cycle. I needed to try something new. I needed to buck the trend. I glanced at the bridge. The tales I had heard flooded back to me. The boy's ghost, phantom vehicles. The peculiarity of the road was centered on this bridge, which served as its focal point. Perhaps the bridge, rather than the road, was the loop. Perhaps each time I crossed the bridge, my journey was restarted. I had a desperate, crazy thought. I was not going to worry about it. I was going to turn around. I reversed the enormous tanker. The route was narrow and foggy, and the maneuver was extremely perilous. Amidst the eerie silence, the backup alarm of the trailer started beeping. I backed the rig up slowly and laboriously using my mirrors, which simply reflected a swirling wall of white. Past the muddy pull-off, I retreated. I retreated past the oak that was scorched by lightning. I continued, my arms hurting from wrangling the wheel, my neck screaming in protest. I retreated for what seemed like an eternity. Then my side mirror caught my attention. The bridge wasn't the problem. They were a set of headlights. I felt a rush of relief that was so strong it nearly brought me to tears. Another vehicle, another individual. I wasn't by themselves. With my danger lights flashing, I halted the truck and waited. Slowly, the automobile came closer, its headlights piercing the fog. It came up next to my taxi. A park ranger leaned out as the window rolled down. His face was pleasant but worn, and he appeared ancient and weathered. "Are you okay there, son?" he said in a steady, quiet voice. Bit of a strange way to be driving. When I said, "I'm lost," my voice cracked. "I'm confined. I keep coming back to the same bridge on this road." With a look of profound anguish in his eyes, the ranger nodded slowly. This was nothing new to him. "Yeah," he muttered. "She occasionally does that. Becomes somewhat possessive. You made the correct decision. Moving forward merely keeps you informed. Sometimes the only way out is to go backwards." I got directions from him. Easy to follow instructions that didn't make sense on any map. But I had complete faith in him. "Continue another mile back. On your left is a short, unmarked service road. Although it appears to be a dead end, it's not. It will lead you to Route 23. Don't pause or turn around," I said, my voice full of emotion. "Thank you." He merely tipped his hat. "Thank you. Be careful," he whispered, and proceeded to drive, his tail lights fading into the fog in the bridge's direction. I followed his instructions exactly. After another mile of backing up, I looked to the left side of the road and saw it a little, nearly imperceptible gap in the trees. I turned my rig into what didn't appear to be a road. It was a straight path, albeit hard and unpaved. 5 minutes later, I was treated to the sight of Route 23's traffic and streetlights, which was magnificent, lovely, and amazing. I had left. Weariness and lingering terror made me tremble as I drew my tanker over my body. I considered the ranger. He had been going into the circle toward the bridge. Was patrolling this spooky road his job, or did he participate as well? A helping spirit, an antidote to the evil of the roads. I'll never know. That morning, as the sun rose, it felt like a resurrection as I brought my gasoline. I never explained my tardiness to my employer. I got lost in the fog, I said. However, I am aware of the reality. I wasn't lost. I was located. I got stuck on a road that feeds on time and direction, a path that only leads to itself. And I discovered that sometimes having the guts to stop going ahead and face a nightmare is the only way to get out of it. The shadows you left behind. Thank you for viewing. If you had fun, which of these tales chilled you the most? Tell me in the comments. Remember to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with your friends for more frightful content, stories,